Hello, welcome to Julie Blewis's collection. We are here in the home of Julie in Naples, Florida, in her museum collection, which is housed in a temperature-controlled and light-controlled environment. And we are so fortunate that she was gracious to allow us to come in and see her rare collection of characters, both German and French. You are in for quite the treat today. I'm Alicia Carver of Signature Dolls, and I have been a UFDC judge giving highlight tours for the past 11 years. So I am just thrilled to be able to be here giving you a highlight tour of some of the more special dolls in her collection. After that, I'm going to be showing you her French fashion dolls, some of which are very rare in character, of course, because we all know that Julie loves her characters. And we're going to be seeing some really wonderful examples. Now, the Series Fantastique, the Jumeau 200 series, were commissioned by Lambert in 1890s for his automatons. And he wanted them so that the expressions on the dolls' faces could actually match the movements of the automatons or add life to the movements, make them seem more lifelike. Well, Emile Jumeau loved them so much that he decided to make character Bebes and tried his hand at the Series 200, and he ended up making 24 different dolls. The number is from 200 to 225, with the number 213 never being made due to the fact that they thought the number 13 was a bad number. Interesting, the first 20 are highly characterized dolls, and the last 5 are still characters, and they're expressive, but they have a much more softer, childlike or ladylike look. So today we're going to begin with this Jumeau 200 series, Series Fantastique, and we have something really wonderful to show you. A doll that Julie recently acquired, Series 200, which has never before been seen. And here he is, the world premiere of the Jumeau 200 doll. This extremely pouty boy with an exaggerated mouth, which is greatly downcast. And he has, I don't think you can see it from this angle, but he's got molded upper teeth. And he's got quite the frown on the top of his forehead. He is not a happy camper, but he is wonderful nonetheless. And he's dressed in a sailor suit, wearing his original Jumeau shoes and red knit socks. Here we have a Jumeau 203, and this one is rare because she's smaller. Most of the Jumeau characters are large, from size 9 and up towards 13. But this one is 14 or 16 inches. And the interesting thing about her is that she's a two-headed doll. So I'm going to come in here and turn her head. On the one side, you have the screaming child, mold 211, and on the other side, you have this wide, beaming, happy child with molded teeth, number 203. So next to her, we have her big sister, who is also a happy child. She's actually mold 208, and she is a wildly laughing child with 2 rows of sculpted teeth and a molded tongue in between them. And she's got the sort of, squinty eyes and facial expression of a child who's having a great time and laughing wildly at somebody's joke. In this case, I think she's laughing at her pouty brother in the other corner. On the bed, we have mold 211, known as the wailing child. And she is the unhappiest of all the characters. She is throwing a tantrum. She's got an open mouth, again with the hint of a tongue, and molded upper teeth, and as you can see, very squinty eyes, as a child is wanton to do when they're in the middle of a tantrum. Now, the fun thing about this grouping and these kind of exaggerated expression character dolls is that you can put them together in a vignette like you have here, and you can create your own narratives around it. For example, in my mind, the little girl is throwing a tantrum on the bed. She's on timeout. The boy on the left is very unhappy because he's in a room full of his sisters and he's having to watch them. And he's not happy because one is screaming, having a tantrum, the other one is cracking up at him, and even the dog is pulling at his clothing. He is not a happy camper. So it makes for just a fun way to enjoy your collection. Here we have Sumo 218. Beautiful brown-skinned mulatto child, which makes her even a tad rarer. And she is a child with a startled expression. And if you look at her mouth, it's shaped like an O in a circle. And she has also a molded tongue, and the upper teeth are molded. Now, she is wearing her original Ernestine Sumo couturier costume. And her Sumo shoes are in red silk and her knit socks. And it looks like her layers of original factory underwear. So it's not only special that she's already a rare 218 character, but she's also mulatto, and she also has her all original factory clothing. So quite special. To her right, we have what is known as the whistling child. He is Sumo 205. And this one is a whistling boy as an automaton. Even though the literature says that he did make some as children, I don't think many, or any actually, have been seen as Bebes, but rather only the automaton version. And he has puckered lips. And if you look really closely in his mouth, he's got a little cutout hole, so it looks like he's whistling when you wind him up and he makes the whistling sound. Here we have Sumo 202, a very rare doll, large, 29 inches, and she is only one of two currently known Sumo 202s. She's known as the Crying Sumo, and if you look closely at her face, you can see molded tears down her cheeks, and again, an open mouth with a molded tongue and her molded upper teeth showing. Holding her little French Polichinelle toy. Although this grouping is not part of the original series Fantastique, I felt like they should be mentioned because they were made concurrently during the same time era, and they were made as exhibition models, and they're quite rare. And Julie has three wonderful examples of brown complexioned exhibition dolls, and one that has a very dark ethnic complexion. The one in the middle has a kind of a wide smile, and I think that she bears a resemblance to the one mold 203, which is a child with a wide beaming smile and molded teeth. The facial modeling isn't exact, but it definitely, you can see the familial time, which explains why they were made at the same time. This was when Sumo was experimenting with a lot of his characters. These were commissioned dolls, or they were made for exposition. They weren't really mass marketed as play dolls during the era. Now we move into an interesting transition because we're going to feature the last of one of the series Fantastique's exaggerated expression children, which is this mold right here. But you can see right next to him the ladies that are in the 221, 222, 223, 224, 225 series, how different they look. Even though they're still expressive, they're still emotive, they've got a gentleness about them, they look more like the Bebes that we're used to seeing. So we'll start with this one in the center. And now this one is a little bit of an enigma because in the literature, he's supposed to be mold 209, the boy with the scrunched up face and the mouth twisted to the side and a little hole in the center, even though he's dressed like a hobo, and more, has lots of painting on his face. But he is still that same model child. But when I looked at him this morning, he's actually marked 210. And in the literature, 210 is a completely different mold. So these are some of the little inconsistencies that we find in the doll world that makes us say, huh, you can never say never. You can never say it's always going to be one way or it's always going to be another. So who knows? Maybe they made a 210 version with kind of like part A and part B. It's possible. But this is mold 209 supposedly, but he's marked 210. To the left of him, we have this very pretty Bebes looking child. And she is the last one in the series. She's mold 225. And she looks very similar to Jumeau's Bebes Française, which was made in the same year. And it's the doll that you see with the BF mark that most people don't always attribute to Jumeau, but it is a Jumeau mold Bebes Française. To the right of her, we have a very unusual looking lady. She's mold 222. And if you see her, she has sort of a happy, smiling expression. So there's still a lot of expression and emotion in her face. But if you look at her, she's sort of different. She has a very narrow face, long, a higher forehead, smaller eyes. A very unusual departure from the typical Jumeau design of, pretty lady dolls. If we pan down here, and you see this lady down here, she's mold 221. Mold 221 is an adult woman with a gentle face and a very classic beauty. She looks similar to the one that is marked 222, the one after her, but the one that is marked 222 actually has more character features. So now we move to Julie's fabulous French fashions. They're not just your average French fashions. They are all rare and have unusual features, but we're going to begin with this crowning jewel, no pun intended, the Rochard large French fashion doll with all the jewels in her bosom and her neck. As we know from seeing other people discuss the Rochard dolls, every single one of those pieces of jewelry that you see on her necklace is actually a stanhope. And it's got micro photographs that can be seen when you place a light inside of the back of the head where there's a huge opening so you can put a light in there. The interesting thing about this particular doll, what makes her even more interesting, is not only does she have all those stanhopes of lots of different photographs, which include photographs of religious figures, national treasures of France, artwork, street photos of Parisians at play. But what makes her fascinating is if you look at her mouth and you get close, you can see that there's a pierced opening in her mouth. And it's actually so you can look through it because inside her head, there's also a kaleidoscope. And if you like that, you can see the kaleidoscope. Now, Rochard was trying to make toys that were also interesting for children to play with. And he was making them at a time when there was fascination with photographs and with stanhopes and what you could do with photography. So initially he made them only as heads, and then down the road people put them on, kid bodies and other bodies in order to turn them into full-size dolls. But they do have beautiful faces. What makes them wonderful, though, is all those features. To her left, large behind her, we have what you would think is a portrait of a portrait Jumeau fashion. And she indeed does have a portrait Jumeau fashion face, although it's much more modeled and much more childlike than the average Jumeau fashion. But if you look at her closely, what you notice is that she doesn't have a swivel neck. She's a shoulder head, and this is so far the only shoulder head version we have seen. Now here we have this very interesting, unusual French character fashion made by George Most. Now, George Most, not a whole lot is known about him other than he was born in Germany, so he was German, moved to France and lived there his entire life, married a French lady, and both of them then created these amazing different doll heads, but only for a short while. And it's a character doll head with an open mouth and molded teeth. And look at the deep dimple impressions and her wide open eyes and her high arched eyebrows. You can see that she almost has a startled look. Yet it was at a time, this is like the late 1860s, early 1870s, when most people were only creating pretty dolls with closed mouths. So that really makes for a very innovative, doll maker. But he wasn't around very long. After the Franco-Prussian War and during that era, he just never made dolls again. But Julie does have 2 and possibly 3 George Most dolls, which we're going to look at next. Here is the second doll in Julie's collection that is made by George Most. And you can see that she has the same kind of highly characterized expression with wide open eyes, and she has impressed dimples and an open mouth with molded teeth. This one is smaller. She's about 16 to 17 inches and she's on a kid leather body, but she definitely depicts a younger lady, not a lady doll, which is why she's dressed like a young lady. To her left, we have a Peru Fashion, which is the 2-headed doll. Right now you're looking at the smiling expression. If we turn the head, you would see the crying face. Now we move on to the current, everyone's favorite, Hurets. Yay! Here we have a Gentleman by Huret. And he's got his original skin wig, his original gentleman costume and shoes and hat, and he also has a trunk, which we'll look at in a few minutes, with more clothing. Of course, it's not just any trunk, it's a Louis Vuitton trunk. But if you look to the right, you will see a doll that is a very interesting piece of artwork. For years, she was attributed to Huret. Now, she definitely has the same look of Huret, but in Thymer's research, as of late, he has attributed this doll possibly to George Most, the dolls that we just looked at, because of her open mouth with molded teeth, because the eye painting, even though it's got the little extra watery, layer underneath the eye, their eyes are smaller than Huret eyes. So his reasoning is the painting is slightly different, the modeling is slightly different, even though there's an incredible familiar look. But this particular doll is still kind of up in the air. She could be a Huret, she could be a George Most. Either way, it doesn't matter. She's a wonderful example of, an 1860s art creation. If we pan down, you can see the wonderful little Louis Vuitton trunk, and you can see the clothing, the extra clothing. He's got gloves, he's got, I'm going to pull out some of the, she has an extra dress. He's got an extra pair of pants, more shirts, a vest, a beautiful little blouse with little, let's take a look at this little blouse. Beautiful little blouse with tiny, tiny little tuck pleats and little mother of pearl buttons. Anyway, and if you can see the beautiful trunk displayed, we have a beautiful dress here with jet beads made in the infantine style. So she has a silk blue infantine dress, and she also has an evening dress-up outfit. Now, you've heard of Rodiquet cordonnier dolls, RNC. They're usually dolls that kind of are statuesque, and they are a cross between a French fashion doll that was made for play and an artistic figurine. And This is one of those dolls, but she does not have the typical face. This is a very unusual head, marked RNC, with 2 rows of molded teeth, an open closed mouth, and again, Rodicat, pardon my French, Rodicat was another innovator of the same era during a time when everybody was making pretty face, closed mouth dolls. And here you see a highly characterized face with dimples and a big white smile and a very, very happy expression. But she has that beautiful painting with the mauve shadowing and the paperweight eyes, and she has those beautiful bisque arms. And now we're going to show you some of Julie's House of Romer dolls. Here we have a bisque one with her original skin wig. And she has a very, very fat, chubby cheeks and a swivel neck and those beautiful, chunky, well-defined arms that go above the elbows that you see on the Fashion Romer dolls. Now we have this wonderful rarity. This is a Le Vert ici, and it's a beautifully modeled French fashion doll made by, we don't know the head who it was made by, even though it's usually attributed to Le Vert. However, Le Vert was actually the one who designed the pattern for the body. And it's a very unusual body, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. But let's look at her face for a second. Some of the current thinking is that she was possibly designed and made by Hure. This is what Timer thinks in his research is a good possibility. There's some evidence that it's a possibility from some of the sheets that are left in the company, etc. But if you look closely at her, she's got that very fat, wide, chubby cheeks. And I don't know if you can see it, but she actually has tiny little painted teeth inside her mouth. And she does have a swivel neck. Now, the other thing I want to say about Le Vert that's really interesting, this doll, and you can't really see it, is there's an actual indentation in the bisque head where the wig actually sits inside of it. So if she has a fancy wig or a skin wig, the wig will actually go into that depression and the head is sort of carved out so that the wig sits that way. So another unusual feature. But the most unusual thing about her is that she is actually on a gutta percha body, which we know he raised gutta percha bodies. Most of them did not survive. The reason why it did not survive is the gutta percha was not a stable enough material. However, this particular doll has layers of thin linen that is pressed on top of the gutta percha and molded on top of it, and then a final layer of kid skin. And these gutta percha bodies have survived. But I want you to see, I've taken off her underwear so you can see the body and appreciate the rarity of it. Look at her wonderful little antique slippers. They're just fabulous. If you look at the way that her hips are jointed, she has a side hip jointing on the hip. And you see the kid. You also see that the body bends here, and it can also rotate. So if she really wanted to sit cross-legged like a gentleman, she probably could. I'm not going to force it because the mechanism, but all of this is joined with metal inside. It was really quite a patent and quite a design, and she makes for an absolutely beautiful presentation. She has a gorgeous dress of damask silk, very fine, with incredibly beautiful thin paper lace at the edge of it, shaped in little drop leaves. Okay. Here is Julie's second Le Ver de Scie doll in her collection. And this one is a rather large and stately model with a beautiful, elaborate wig and quite the portrait face. Very pale bisque, paperweight eyes. And again, that same wonderful Le Ver body that I showed you on the other one. Earlier I was talking about Rochard dolls, and I showed you Julie's very large Rochard doll that has the kaleidoscope on the head, but she also has a second one, which is actually in some ways rarer because she's an unusual size, and she's the smaller sized one over here with the single stanhope in her neck jewelry, but just as beautiful and just as rare. So if you turn around the Rochard doll, you can see the cutout, the opening where you actually place the light. You put a flashlight in there. And then when you look through the stanhope, you can see the little photographs that are magnified. This smaller doll has a cutout on the neck. The larger doll that I showed you earlier not only has a neck cutout, but she also has a head cutout as well, because she has the kaleidoscope inside the head as well. So she not only has all those stanhopes, she has a kaleidoscope, which makes her really unusual. To the right of her is an unmarked fashion that we do not know who it is attributed to, but I want you to look at the neck articulation. It almost looks like the bottom of a perfume flask bottle that should fit into something else. So I've never seen that particular neck articulation. She has painted eyes and a wonderful wig with long ringlets. And over here we have not your typical Peru Fashion. We have a celluloid version of the Peru Fashion. And if you know anything about celluloid dolls, you know that very few survived, as it's a highly flammable material, and so many of them have not made it. So it's kind of a rarity to see a celluloid French fashion doll still intact and still in this great condition. If we go to the back, over here, of course we see that wonderful gentleman in that fabulous costume, but to the left of him I really want to spend some time showing you this particular doll, because this is a very rare, one of a kind actually, portrait French fashion doll. And look at her neck articulation, how it doesn't join. Usually it joins at the beginning of the neck socket, where the shoulder plate begins. This one is sort of high up. But what's great about her is that she has a signature on the neck. And there are very few of these dolls found. They're part of a series of dolls that they believe were created for the Paris Exposition of 1867. And this one is a portrait of Queen Marguerite de Valois, and she was the wife of Henry IV. And if you look at portraits of Queen Marguerite, you will see that there's definitely an incredible likeness to her. And this doll was actually sold by the House of Giroux, and she has layers of original underclothing that bear the craftsmanship and the same kind of scenes known to be done by the House of Giroux. And she also has an original Renaissance gown, also resembling the gown that's in the famous portrait of Queen Marguerite. And the other thing that's interesting about her is that she's on a wood body that was actually made by Herbillon. And she has bisque hands that resemble the Huret bisque hands, the ones that we find on Huret dolls that are on the gutta percha bodies or wood bodies with bisque hands. Now, if you look closely at her face, you can see the likeness of the queen, and she's got a smiling expression, and she has very, very molded eyelids, and just a wonderful, wonderful characterization of a portrait of the queen. So we brought this doll out to show you just because she's so fascinating. And I'm looking at her eyelids, and they're not just molded, they're kind of protruding actually. And she's got this long aquiline nose, a very, very regal expression. And I just love her smiling expression. She looks quite pleased with herself. But look at the arch of her eyebrows. They begin sort of almost at the nose and go all the way over to outside of the eyelid. So, and they're sort of, from an angle here, I can see they're molded. So this is really an unusually painted doll. If you look at her clothing, this is her original silk Renaissance gown. And I want you to see the train so you can see how beautiful. And this color combination of coral and tan is one that you see on so many dolls and so many portraits of the era of the 1860s. Even though she's supposed to be a queen that lived during the middle 1700s. I don't know if you can see her eyes there, so you can see how deeply modeled they are and how deep in the eye sockets they reside. I want you to see the bisque hands. And if I pull up her sleeve just a tad, you can see where the wood body attaches to the bisque hand. And again, this is a doll that was sold by Maison Giraud, which doesn't surprise me at all, as everything that came out of Maison Giraud was such wonderful quality, including the furniture and the clothing, and now a doll that was sold there. But no pun intended, this is probably one of the crowns of Julie's collection.